You're listening to Contesting Wrestling, Minisode 50. Holy shit. 50. It's bonkers. I don't know how we did it. This is going to be the end capstone, the last part of our series on the late great Eddie Guerrero, in which I was asked to watch a bit that was only a few minutes long and yet incredibly sad.
Yes, the aftermath of the main event of WrestleMania 20. We'll make Evan watch the actual match.
We all wanted to cry today.
But yeah, so Chris Benoit finally wins the world title after all of his years of struggling to make it to the top of the wrestling business. And, Doc and I were there live, and, Eddie Guerrero is also the champion. He's the WWE champion. Benoit's the world champion. He
had that great match with Kurt Angle earlier in the night.
He had the great match with Kurt Angle. So Benoit is celebrating, posing on the turnbuckle, and he turns around, and there's Eddie. And he gives him a big hug, and the two of them who have had this long, arduous wrestling journey together are finally at the very top of the business at the end of perhaps the greatest WrestleMania of all time.
They're both world champions somehow together.
Yeah. And the part they don't show you on the network is that Nancy comes out too. And I think maybe the kids.
Oh, no. Did she?
Yeah.
I can't remember hearing that or seeing that.
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure if Daniel was born yet, actually.
I mean, he would have been. He was 7 when it happened.
Oh, he was 7. That's right. Right. Yeah. So he was. Yeah. So.
No, Nancy was there. You can't see her. But it was very emotional. It was great. And within a few years, it's like that whole world, that whole lineage in wrestling broke down and was tainted in several ways. I like to compare them, and I've said this before on the podcast. They are the angel and the devil. And somewhere, and I don't believe in any astral stuff. I don't really believe in spirituality, but I like to think that somewhere at the border of heaven and hell, there's a table that Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit get to sit on either end on. And Eddie Guerrero is sipping tea, and they're boiling that tea on Chris Benoit's face and then pouring it into a cup, and they talk about the old days.
Little demons put white-hot pokers through Benoit's testicles.
There you go.
I do think that I would hope that some of the torture for Chris Benoit's crimes are being saved for. I mean, it's hard to really exactly pinpoint, but I hope that every doctor that ever examined him at the behest of Vince McMahon, who was like, yeah, he could wrestle. I hope that Vince. Yeah. I mean, Vince is going to suffer if we're in this scenario, this afterlife scenario. Vince is going to have a not great time, and that's good. But it really is something I do find, fascinating and horrifying about the Benoit cases. It really does beg the question, where is the line between personal responsibility and traumatic brain injuries.
And even worse and even harder for us as wrestling fans, the beauty of that moment, which was was full of positive emotion at the time, had to do with how much these two guys had sacrificed of their bodies, of their lives to get to the point that they were at. And that very sacrifice is what led to their early demises as well. So the very thing that makes that moment so beautiful for us as wrestling fans also contributes to the horror that followed it. And those two things are inextricable.
Yeah, they really are. Neither of them would have made it to the WWE or in the WWE if they didn't do at least some of the things that eventually led to their deaths. And to the WWE's credit, the deaths of Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit did make them like it's hard to say, like Evan, as you put it, where is the line between personal responsibility and like traumatic brain injury or something. And the WWE has since significantly and observably moved that line. And when they moved that line, almost everybody else moved it too. And like to this day, I'm starting to see now on indie shows, people are starting to bean each other in the head with chairs again. Because it's kind of become taboo. It's like, oh, yeah, you can't see this.
Don't do
like,
that, y'all.
Don't
Please don't do that.
It's
not.
like-
It's not cool. It's not
Hey,
like edgy. You're just hurting your brain. You need your
No.
brain.
If you want to do the chair to the head spot, just put your hands up and make most of the noise with your hands. And maybe it makes contact with your forehead a little. But don't take unprotected, full force
Please.
swinging chair shots to the head. And if there are fans that are like, well, I only want to see that, then, I get them out of our shows. We don't, they are demanding you die for them.
It's kind of like how a big part of what plays into anti-vaxxer sentiment is the fact that vaccines worked so well that, like, polio has passed out
Right.
of living memory for most Americans.
Right.
And so, or
Yeah,
like, and
my
like,
mom remembers
Oh
it.
no,
Yeah,
that was
like,
that was a
and-
sick. Let's be real, Doc. That was a sick burn on my part that day. We were in the
Oh.
room and someone started going off. It was with not the worst kind of anti-vax rhetoric you could have, but more like I don't trust the government, which is, and I'm not blah blah blah. We all take too many vaccines. Like nothing like really conspiracy theory, like. But still, like, harmful.
Yeah.
And I just turned to Doc's mother, who is 80, and said, hey, remember polio? And that kind of shut the room up.
I would hope so, because I mean, that,
Yeah.
as you said, certainly some blame for the rise in anti-vaxxer sentiment lies with the FDA not generally being the most reputable institution, and
Yeah.
the failures of institutions are inevitably going to breed conspiratorial thinking about said institutions, because said institutions will also claim to be on point and doing the things that they're supposed to be doing when it is painfully obvious to everybody paying attention that they are failing entirely at what they're
Yeah.
supposed to do. But also at the same time, yeah, it's you need to vaccinate.
Please vaccinate your
kids.
children.
Yeah, and the doctors that have created the modern vaccine schedule, they know what they're doing.
Oh God, we have a very close friend who, when this friend of ours had a child, I saw poking around like, hey, does anybody like know any doctors who work with parents doing delayed vaccines? And I was like, it took everything I
Yeah.
had to not say you're gonna be real. I'll tell you off air, and it's gonna bum you the fuck out if you're not remembering.
I'm not remembering.
Yeah. Let's say it's somebody else who technically appears on this podcast.
Yeah, and I know who you're talking about.
I think
No, I don't.
Yeah.
And you
now
know, if
I'm
you
mad.
react real violently.
No, that sucks.
Yeah.
If you react real violently to a question like that, it doesn't help anybody, you know?
Oh no.
So if the Eddie Guerrero end of the Eddie Guerrero story didn't suck enough, Bruce Pritchard recently said on his podcast that the plan for WrestleMania 22 was a match that never happened. Eddie Guerrero versus Shawn Michaels.
Damn it!
Was going to happen at WrestleMania 22.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been the greatest thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Probably,
they would have
yeah.
pushed it as a real dream match, and it would have been a real dream match.
That's part of why they did Michaels versus Mysterio on the Eddie tribute show, because they were like, let's get this one out of the way now before anybody else fucking just dies.
Yeah, they had on the Eddie tribute show, and they did a whole episode of a SmackDown, right? Or was it
Raw.
Raw? A whole episode of Raw just in tribute of him, where they'd have backstage pieces with just one person talking, saying whatever they want for however long they want. And they asked Shawn Michaels, what do you have to say? And Shawn's like, look, I didn't know Eddie Guerrero very well. I never wrestled him. We were always kind of on different brands. I always liked him when I did see him. And then he said a bunch of Christian stuff because they were both religious people. And he was the guy to do that. Chris Benoit, who almost never showed any emotion other than basic grr,
Murr.
just starts openly screaming, weeping. and about how he's going to miss Eddie Guerrero forever, and he can't believe that he's gone, and this isn't real, and
The Dark Side of the Ring episodes on Benoit from Viceland made the case very well that Eddie Guerrero's death had a lot to do with Benoit's spiraling down afterwards. He was, a guy who didn't open up to a lot of people, who was very quiet and shy and to himself, and his best friend in the world died. And that really had a large part in breaking him. And
Side note that Eddie and Sean sharing that bond also really plays into your theory, Ben, that high flyers are disproportionately religious people.
yeah, wrestlers in general, I think.
Yeah. I guess there has to be some sort of faith that
that's someone's looking
yeah.
out for you, however untrue that might be. And then the worst part of the really bad part about this story about the Eddie tribute show is when Benoit died, the details of his death were not apparent immediately. And he died, I think, like the morning before Raw. So they did a whole Benoit tribute special that night on Raw with everyone crying and talking about how great Benoit was and how much they loved him.
Oh boy!
And
Yeah,
then
they
they
played
found
matches.
out what actually happened.
It was the first time they had ever canceled Raw and told everyone to go home. The show opened with Vince just in the ring with the microphone like, we're not doing this. We're not doing
I'm
this.
gonna guess-
Here's his matches. Yeah.
I'm gonna guess that is not still on the network.
No.
No, they took that episode. For
I'm
I
gonna
may
guess-
or
think I
may
still
not
have it
have
on
that as a
VHS.
file on one of my hard drives.
Oh, I was just say we know some people who are old school wrestling fans who are also the kind of guys who like edgy humor and
Yeah.
stuff, and like I know like one guy at least I know like loves to wear his Chris Benoit shirt out in the. I haven't
Oh,
talked to him
boy.
in years. I imagine that he still does that. But I'm going to say I bet every single one of those guys, these are guys that we went to college with and were sort of in similar scenes musically with and that kind of stuff. I bet they all have that on on recording somewhere.
I still
man.
have a lot of
It's-
fondness for those guys too.
Oh yeah, they're all
yeah,
great
I love
guys.
those guys.
Good.
Yeah, there's a certain novelty in that show in particular. I haven't watched it since it aired, but yeah, it's not on the network for obvious reasons.
Oh, it aged poorly, and by aged I mean within hours.
There were a couple of people that when they did their like speeches about Benoit, like were just reserved. Like John Cena was very reserved, but he more like gave a speech like a guy in a foxhole and bombs are going around him and he's the sergeant and he has to be like, all right, everybody, we're just gonna move forward and we're gonna be okay, and this is a tragedy, and
William
William
Regal,
Regal
yeah.
was the big one because Regal had been on the journey around the world with Eddie and Benoit and all of them, and he had very very British like stiff upper lip kind of thing. He kind of pursed his lips and talked about death and the future and everything, and later he said, I kind of thought I knew what was going on and I didn't want to just give a gushing review.
Who
for
was
Chris
this
Benoit.
again?
Regal.
William Regal.
Oh yeah, no, Regal notoriously could sense something was wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, and it really was. He was
He's
he was
a smart
supposed
man.
to face CM Punk the night before at the pay-per-view, and they had to announce a last-minute replacement because Benoit didn't show up. Apparently, he had called in and his kid was sick. No, his kid wasn't sick.
His kid was dead.
His kid was dead. And
Right,
within,
that's right.
Terrible.
He didn't
next day,
die
had
the
to
day
take-
of Raw because they didn't find him for a while.
Yeah, that whole weekend was I don't want to get into the
Yeah,
grisly
yeah.
details of the Chris Benoit incident. You can find
Yeah,
out all
I mean
about that if
everyone
you want to.
it's a
The
known story.
one person
Yeah.
who comes off quite well in the Dark Side of the Ring treatment of the whole thing is Chavo. Chavo Guerrero, it was like the one guy who reached out to Benoit's other son and Nancy's sister, who were both, obviously grieving and extremely lonely. I think he reunited the two of them because they were estranged from each other
Yep.
as well. Whereas the WWE, Vince McMahon didn't fucking
Wow.
say anything to them for years. So yeah, Chavo, yeah, good guy. I think.
Solid guy.
By the way, so AC/DC is touring with Stevie Young. Stevie Young being the nephew of Angus and Brian, who's the
Malcolm.
son. Malcolm. Angus and Malcolm, who unfortunately passed away recently. Stevie is the son of their much older brother, who's like kind of around their age. So he's like the Chavo Guerrero of the Youngs.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised when, like, here we are 7 months into quarantine and AC/DC announced, well, new album's done. We're tentatively planning a world tour for like a year.
Right, they're
from
not
now.
actually
It's like,
touring. Yeah.
I was gonna say, is Brian Johnson singing?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
Because I know the reason that they had to go on tour with Axl Rose a few years ago is because doctors told Brian Johnson that, like, if you ever play a live show again, you will lose your hearing forever.
Well, I don't know what changed or if anything changed, but Brian Johnson is front and center on the new album.
That's good. Good for him.
And I will be very surprised if once they're allowed to, they don't tour. Because the only reason a band like AC/DC puts out a new album is a prop for them to do their world tour, which is what they all want to do until they die.
I mean, in this case,
of them have.
I think putting out the album was also a bit of therapy, having lost Malcolm.
Oh, yeah.
And
also and their drummer didn't die, but their drummer, I believe, is in prison because their drummer hired somebody to murder somebody else a few years ago. There was a whole story about that.
You could just do that in Australia.
Yeah, exactly. Oh,
they're all criminals anyway.
Yeah, Australia is 97% Irish rapists, and then 3% one of the oldest and most interesting cultures that humanity has ever produced that has been whittled down to almost nothing by the aforementioned Irish rapists.
Yes. I'm trying to see who's drumming on this album.
Speaking
Phil Rudd.
Wow.
Hey.
All right.
Wow.
Good. I guess you really can just do whatever you want in Australia.
There you go, Phil Rudd.
Speaking of the grisly past, I want to shout out here and recommend Chris Levin, referee Chris Levin, who's a friend of the podcast, was our guest several episodes ago.
Wait a second. Now, I want you to get this out. So, yeah, he was arrested and charged with attempting to procure murder, threatening to kill, possession of methamphetamine and cannabis following a police raid on his home. The charge of attempting to procure murder was withdrawn the next day. He pled guilty to the other charges, ended up spending 8 months in house arrest.
Wow.
And he had to pay $120,000 New Zealand currency.
Wow, Chris Levin has been really busy since our last episode.
No, that's Phil Rudd. I'm sorry, Ben, please.
I was going to say I would have thought I'd hear something if that had happened.
Anyway, Ben.
No,
please,
I don't know,
So,
Chris.
Please do tell us of Chris Levin. I wanted to finish that because I had to say
Chris
it.
has indeed been busy curating the first episode of his podcast, Tales from the Mat. It's 2 hours long. It's incredibly well researched with interviews from Gerald Briscoe and Lufisto and all sorts of other people and lots of different wrestlers lending their voice talents to wrestlers of the past who we only have like written accounts from. And it's about the legend of the wrestler George Tragos, who trained Lou Thez. And Tragos was known for being a hooker, not, in the modern sense of the term, but
not a sex worker. An old wrestling term for somebody who could actually beat you
and
up.
Could actually hurt you.
And also could give you a sweet blowjob.
And the legends are that not only was he a hooker, but he was a ripper. He was someone who enjoyed hurting people, though that is sort of a bit dubious. But there's a specific incident where,
as opposed to people who were hookers and sewers, SEWER, who could really hurt you but hated doing it and felt really sad.
They put you back
when
together.
They hurt you.
There were also doctors.
Yeah.
But there's a particular incident, legendary incident, where Tragos supposedly injured an opponent so badly that his arm became gangrenous and had to be removed. And Levin goes into great depth trying to verify this story as well as possible, or to find out what actually happened and authenticate it. Fascinating stuff. I can't recommend it more for anyone who's interested in the history of pro wrestling.
Oh, that's awesome.
Chris is great.
I love me a well-researched history podcast.
Oh yeah, and Chris is the best kind of person to do it.
And so there's one story in there that I wanted to talk about because because of course I got to talk about the Montreal Screwjob more. And there's a story about Stan Hansen and Bruno Sammartino, where Hansen apparently body slammed him so hard that he cracked one of his vertebrae. And someone once asked Hansen, was that a work or a shoot? And he's like, only Bruno knows. And there's a lot of shit like that, right? Where only the guy selling it knows whether it was legit or not. Just like, only Brett really knows how much the screw job was legit. And
I hope Brett knows.
Right. Yeah.
I would hope so too. There are still people out there that believe it to be wrestling's biggest work.
One of them is
I
on this podcast.
Yeah, no, Ben, I know.
So, okay. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about?
No, I mean, I was gonna towards the at the end I was gonna do a bit of a spiel about
Okay,
upcoming changes and that sort of thing. Which is all right.
Yeah, go right in.
All right, listeners. I really love making this podcast. We all really love making this podcast. When we started doing it, it was my call to be like, look, we got to put out a free feed episode and a premium feed episode. Oh, and we should do a mini episode as well. And we kept that up for a really long time. And I am a broken, empty husk of a man.
He had to hire
As a
a second.
result of this.
Evan has had to hire a second therapist. Everybody.
Yeah, it's not good. It's I mean, my two
first-
therapists are great, but
His first therapist kindly requested that he hire someone to split the load.
well, no, my therapist just sent me to his therapist. So it's kind of like when you're buying weed from a guy and then eventually you're just buying so much weed, he's like, I'm just gonna fucking introduce you to my guy, and you work your way up. It's like that. So at this rate, I will be able to face the final boss of therapy soon, which should be nice. Just for a lot of personal reasons. But what this comes down to is there are two things that are going to happen. One is we are going to slow down a bit on the free feed episodes, where if you are a premium listener, you're still going to get an episode every week. We might take a bit of a break around the holidays, but that's fine. Go be with your family, or just listen to just re-listen to the other episodes. They hold up. And the other thing is that you will probably not hear me for a little while. We still have some more episodes coming out that I'll be on, but I am going to need to step away for a little bit just to rebuild the parts of my brain. Oh, wait, the police are coming for me. The podcast police are coming for me.
Evan has to scrub his brain with a pumice stone.
It is. I want to avoid getting totally fried, so I can come back and still enjoy this and still enjoy wrestling. But it's been a lot. It's been a lot of stuff.
So for the time, time being, expect a main episode every 2 weeks, for the next month or so, and possibly a mini once a month. We'll see if we keep doing that.
We'll see how it goes.
Definitely,
we're gonna continue. We're gonna continue putting out a premium episode every week.
I think even through the holidays, we're gonna give you
Patreon.
something, even if it doesn't involve Evan. And probably while Evan's taking a break, for our main feed listeners, we'll unlock some premium episodes to tide you over.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody who's on our Patreon. Like I said, we are going to continue to do premium episodes over all of this. We'll have something for everybody. Now is when I will direct people to our Patreon, which is at patreon.com/contestingwrestling. If you really like what we do and you give us $5 a month, we have quite an archive of episodes there now also. I talk to people who listen to our show, and most of them are not current. because we have put out such a large amount of material over the last year. I'm very proud of us. I think we've done a lot of good stuff. I get feedback from people, like they'll tell me like a line that one of us said, and I'll think like, when was, like, I don't know, it's this episode you did a while back, and I'm like, oh yeah, who said that? Did Evan say that? That was good.
Turns out it was me.
But
Yeah, turns out it was Katie. It was the
usually
the
Katie.
long farting noise.
Yeah, I'm definitely the funniest of everyone.
Well,
Not
Evan
not
said
to toot
butter
my
knife
own horn, but
Sanchez,
I
right?
am absolutely hysterical.
not to toot my own horn, but here's my solid gold trombone with my own name on it.
Seriously, though, Evan, you came up with butter knife Sanchez, right?
Yes.
As a contrast to
I think
Razor
so.
Ramon.
I think
That
so,
sounds
yes. I
like
think
an
that was
Evan thing.
Because that's real good. Yeah, so we're good. We're gonna slow down a bit. Maybe Ben and Katie and I'll come up with some other stuff to kind of stretch our legs a little.
If you have any
Yeah, Docker.
suggestions, listeners, for stuff that we could do that's, that doesn't require Evan, that you would be interested in, we can get into some more kind of like obscure 80s wrestling TV and stuff like that would really bore Evan to tears, but that
Yeah,
we
but I
find
really like that
endlessly
stuff.
fascinating.
And I really
I
do.
could watch King Kong Bundy sit on people for days on end.
Me and Doc are launching a TikTok. That's not true.
I really do want to emphasize too that like I'm stepping away so as to like ensure that I don't get so completely burned out on wrestling that I can never return because that was a fear I was starting to have. I'm taking a break because I love the small community that has sprung up around what we do, and I love doing this. And I just
He
and
loves
I,
the
and
small
I need,
community. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, and I just need a little time to repair myself and my relationship with wrestling and with the show, so I don't get
mean,
permanently burned out.
That being said, the idea of the podcast in the first place, Evan, is that you don't like wrestling.
Well, yes, and I get that, and so to clarify, I mean it's that I don't. Here, I will put it in wrestling terms, is that I've gone from having heat towards wrestling, for wrestling, whatever. It's gone from like heat to liking, to sort of liking it, to getting it, to back to heat, to now I am stepping away before it becomes X-Pac heat. Because now at the moment, just in my current state, when I watch wrestling, I'm like, I just want this to stop. I can't do this. And that's a shitty energy to bring, especially because the other conceit of this podcast is that you three love wrestling and know more about it than fucking anybody I've ever met, and I don't want to come on here and be like, I just don't want to fucking deal with this thing that the three of you have dedicated your lives towards in various ways. So in order to maintain that good energy, we're taking a break. What I'm saying is that it's not you, it's me. That's what, but actually for real, that's the case.
If any of you listeners know anyone who, like Evan, is baffled by your interest in wrestling, to maintain the conceit of the show, maybe throw them our way, and we will torture them the way we have tortured our dear friend into submission, as we have already done.
I guess I am kind of submitting.
We're tapping out.
But just for now. But it's a best of three.
There you go. Well, that's why you tap out, so you don't get injured so badly that you can't compete again.
Yeah, that's true.
The metaphor works beautifully.
I mean, wrestling is, a metaphor for everything. So,
well, so in wrestling, they do the tap out like it's somebody's like struggle with themselves if they're gonna give up. But like if you're at like a jiu-jitsu gym and somebody gets your arm in an arm bar, you're supposed to tap out as quickly as possible for that reason exactly. There's no shame in it. They got you. What, do you want to break your arm? And by training yourself out of that whole, like, what are you, a pussy mindset that, that America teaches its boys especially, getting out of that mindset actually makes you a much tougher guy and a much nicer guy. For real.
Absolutely.
So there you go. That's my philosophy for the day.
But yeah, so we just wanted to give you all that update, listeners. We love you. and this is but that's not just the thing that I say at the end of the episodes. Like we
actually
genuinely
is.
do.
Every time
Yeah.
every time we log off, Evan actually curses out how much he hates everyone and how he wants to burn his own home to the ground.
Right, and that's how I
And
show
punches
love.
himself in the
That's how you
dick.
Yeah.
show love.
Yeah.
With the heat.
All
the
of
heat
those
of the love.
All of those things are the ways that I show love. Did I have a good childhood? No. Are these two things connected? It's possible.
Yes.
My
Yeah.
third therapist will probably be able to tell me that.
I do want to hype up before we go. In 2 weeks, we have Jen Ortiz from Cosmopolitan Magazine on to talk about the Bellas, and I'm really excited about that episode. And do subscribe to our Patreon if you haven't already, and check out our episode on Barton Fink with Professor Jeff Clock, because I'm extremely proud of that one as well. And yeah, again, we have lots of material. You probably haven't heard it all, unless you're my one friend, Zach.
Thank you, Zach.
Thanks so much, Zach.
Thank you, Zach.
You are the rock upon which this is built. This has been Contesting Wrestling. Follow us on Twitter at ContestingW. Let us know what you think, what you feel, what we should do, what you would like to hear from us. And if you miss me for any reason, follow me at Evan Burke, etc. Evan Burke, etc.
Barrage him with messages about this.
Yeah,
by the way.
yeah.
That was
All
let
day,
me know. Let
every
me know
day.
if you miss me. If I get no messages, then I'll know that I don't have to come back home. No. This has been Contesting Wrestling. We love you.
Peace.